Hi, and welcome back to Mountain Minds Monday. We are at the main part of our event and the presentation, but of course we want to thank our sponsors first. I will introduce to you Dick Schulte, who's here to talk about our gold sponsor for this evening, which is Holland & Hart.
Okay, thank you. Holland & Hart has offices in Nevada and in other states throughout the American West. I'm in the Reno office, although I live right here, just about a mile up the road from where we are right now. I'm in the intellectual property group, and I do patents, copyrights, and trademarks. We are a full-service law firm, and for any of your legal needs, we would be delighted to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Dick, and thank you for Holland & Hart sponsorship. We really appreciate that, and I'd like to introduce to you our silver sponsor next, which is Mobo Law. So they have offices in Truckee, Reno, Sacramento, and Incline Village. They represent clients in business law, construction law, estate planning, family law, intellectual property, real estate law, and bankruptcy. And as you can see, we have a whole lot of community partners that support this event. The NC Tech Connection, TTC TV, so that's our live stream crew back there. The Truckee Tahoe Airport, the Lift Co-working, the Truckee Chamber of Commerce, of course, Pizza on the Hill here, and the Truckee Roundhouse. That's where these name tags come from. So thank you so much to all of our sponsors and partners. We couldn't do this without you. And so at this point, we'd love to invite you to become a sponsor, whether that's as a business or as an individual. So this is our business sponsor link. You can always just ask me to. And then to become an individual sponsor, that's $150 for the whole year. So that comes out to paying $12.50 per event. You get not just our standard pizza and salad, but also a beer or wine is included in that. If alcohol is not your thing, 2 sodas. And then we have a special check-in, so you don't have to wait in line to check in. And we want to thank all the individual sponsors who are out here tonight. And we are on to our main event. So tonight's topic is Hibernate, Hoof It, or Hang Tough, Winter Wildlife Survival. And I am really happy to introduce you all to Will Richardson, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. Will has lived in Tahoe since 1994, originally a seasonal Tahoe resident, spending summer running crews for the Point Reyes Bird Observatory and elsewhere in California, and the falls working for the same in the Farallon Islands off the coast of San Francisco. Will finally settled in Truckee in 2001 and has been intensively studying the region's natural history and ecosystems ever since. Will received his Ph.D. in Ecology, Evolution, and Conservation Biology from the University of Nevada, Reno, studying bird communities and the Sierra Nevada aspen habitats. And I am so excited to introduce him for our main event tonight. And he's got his own mic, so I don't need to pass it along. And let's make sure we get, you want to go ahead with that? Okay.
Awesome. Great. You say something about the lights? Did they go down? Is that part of the deal? Maybe? I don't know. All right. Well, in the meantime, thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for Rachel and Garrett for the introduction, but also the invitation for having me come and speak to this group. I haven't been to one of these events before, so this is my first time, and pretty interesting aggregation of folks, I gotta say. A lot of retired people. Makes me wonder what you're hiding, that you didn't want to say what you did. But anyway, yeah, so thanks so much for Mountain Minds Monday and the Silicon Mountain Group and all the sponsors and just everybody. And especially the audience. It's not nearly as fun if I have to stand up here and speak to like 5 people. Yeah, my name is Will, and I am the Executive Director of the Tahoe Institute for Natural Science. I imagine some of you may have not heard of our organization, so I'm just going to talk about it real quickly. We're a research, education, and outreach organization, mostly focusing on upland natural history of the Tahoe region. There's a lot of great organizations that are working with water-related issues, and we try to complement what they do. And actually, we partner with lots of great organizations. It's great to see Gateways here, and the Land Trust is here. And so, anyway, partnerships is what it's all about. But we do have a long-term goal of bringing a world-class interpretive nature center to the region. Just point of clarification, this does not exist. This is people get pretty confused when I put this up. This is my lousy Photoshop skills putting Jeffrey pine trees behind the FEE on Nature Center from Sacramento. But that is a goal, and like any great science institution with a great public interface combined with real-world research going on in the background. In the meantime, we focus on those three main program areas of education, lots and lots of supplemental science curricula for our local school groups. We had over 8,000 student contacts, individual student contacts in 2018. We also do summer camps, lots of field trips. Applied conservation-based research, working with local land management agencies to give them some help answering things about, to manage our resources from a good wildlife perspective. Lots of examples of that I won't go into. And then when we use the word outreach, more like education for the general public, so outside of a school context, mostly lots and lots of free guided nature outings. So if anybody's interested in learning more about Tahoe's nature, we have lots and lots of opportunities for it. This year, I'm just going to skip ahead. Most of our stuff is going to be focused around wildflowers in the summer. We do stuff year-round, though, and just there's a few snowshoe tours coming up in the next couple weeks that are associated with the Alpenglow Mountain Fest. I'll put this back up at the very end, so you don't have to write that down. But on these snowshoe tours, we talk a lot about winter wildlife survival as well. So, but that's that's the point of tonight. Talk about winter wildlife survival. Plants are great. I don't know if I could talk for an hour about winter plant survival, but there's a lot of really interesting adaptations to getting through the winters, like cut triangle-shaped trees to shed snow and flexible limbs and all that kind of stuff, dropping your leaves. Also want to point out, too, that bad weather is kind of subjective thing to say. There's challenging weather, and that's what winter really is. So it's important to kind of think like winter's not the same everywhere, but here we are at like 39 degrees north, and the Earth, unless you're a flat earther, is tilted over at about, 23 and a half. And so during this time of year, the northern hemisphere is tipped away from the sun, and so we're getting we're getting seasons. This is our winter. You guys feel the days are getting longer now? Yeah, it's good. Okay, so seasons. So what happens in winter? Well, we're getting less insolation, less sun coming in, shorter days, longer nights, kind of weaker sun too. It's tempting to think that we're further in the northern hemisphere, we're further from the sun this time of year. We're actually not. What's that term? The perihelion is when the Earth is closest to the sun, and that's usually like the first week of January, I think. So we're actually closer to the sun right now, but the northern hemisphere is tipped away from it. So these having less sun coming in and shorter days of sun coming in means we got a lot more colder temps. Now, if you're an animal, you're thinking about metabolism, and well, you're probably not thinking about it, but what you're engaged in is metabolism and keeping your caloric needs met, having enough food coming in, enough energy coming in that you can maintain body temperatures required for you to make it day to day to day. That gets tough with colder temperatures. On a cellular level, freezing is a real danger. And we have a lot of water in our bodies. When water freezes, it expands into crystals. Crystals are jagged. Cells tend to be fragile. So ice crystals just basically rip apart cells. That's frostbite. Okay, so if you are a soft-tissued organism full of water, you don't want to freeze. That would be bad. It's hard to recover from that. So I'm super thirsty. We get a lot of snow, especially at this elevation. So yeah, we're at 39 degrees north latitude. We're about the same as Williams, some other places in the Central Valley. So being in a mountainous area, all of these things are, made a little more significant. So snow, in particular, is really problematic in the Sierra Nevada, as I'm sure you guys have experienced recently. Buried cars. But if what you're really after is food, it's gone. You can't find it if it's on the ground. Getting around becomes very, very difficult. Most animals don't have much in the way of adaptations for hopping around on top of the snow, so that means you're punching through, you're post holing. There are some benefits, though. So certain organisms really do benefit from a deep snowpack. It can provide shelter from predators in particular, and it can provide a lot of insulation. There's a lot of air in snow, and so if it's very cold especially in the nighttime air, being beneath the snow can provide a lot of insulation from those colder temps. Talk about that in a minute. During the winter, in this Mediterranean climate, that's when we get most of our storms, so that can provide really hazardous conditions for trying to be active. And so when there's a lot of storms, that means your opportunities to be active are much reduced. So you just don't have as much time to work with. If you're a daytime active kind of a critter, diurnal, your days are shorter, so that's problematic. So you just got to find opportunities to get out when you can. Bobcats are an interesting example of really shifting activity patterns that way. Has anybody ever seen a bobcat in their yard? And was it in the wintertime? Yeah, almost always, right? So what happens is they're really struggling to meet their resource needs, to get enough to eat. And so that brings them into neighborhoods. There's birds coming to bird feeders. The dogs tend to be inside. So they just, there's chickens. A friend of mine had a bobcat stuck in his coop the other day. Okay, and then just scarcity of food. So productivity, primary productivity of plants, which starts off the entire food web, all the insects, that just shuts down to a crawl or even a stop. So you have a real scarcity of food, and that affects the whole web of going out. Okay, so there's three main strategies for coping with that, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. You have a whole lot of overlap and maybe even some shifting between strategies. But those three main strategies are to hoof it, to migrate, to just leave that area of hardship and find a place that's going to be easier to meet your resource needs, your caloric needs, and this is a little bit of a bad example, actually, with the butterflies, with monarchs. We all know they go on these really amazing multi-generational migrations, but when they do get to their wintering grounds, they hibernate. And so that's the next one. If you've got a lot of, you're having a hard time meeting those energy needs, just reduce your energy needs. Take a long nap. This can be a really, really successful strategy, and as you'll see, a lot of animals do it. The last one is just hang in there. So if you can find a way, find the adaptations evolutionarily to survive through the winter, find food, stick it out. Chickadees are here year-round. There's actually a good number of birds that are here year-round. Tiny little birds that are here year-round. This guy's able to find frozen, immature insects within the pine needles and take that little bill and shatter the needles open and pull those little bugs out. They also like sunflower seeds. Yeah, so let's start with migration. So I think everybody has a pretty fundamental idea of what migration is. It's going from one place of in your annual cycle to another in a somewhat predictable way due to shifting resources and conditions and needs. So it's not an easy strategy by any means. Moving great distances tends to be very challenging. You don't have a lot of large land mammals, going great distances. Generally speaking, the huge migrations that you see in Africa or even in the Arctic here, they're pretty far, but they're not nearly as far as what like birds can do. Okay, because these guys are light and they're very efficient with locomotion, and so you can have. Is there a pointer on this?
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, look at that.
Yep.
I just didn't want to click it and have everything go haywire. Okay, so you can have, black-poll warblers that are about the same size as that chickadee that are breeding, way up here, or even Alaska, and then what they do is in the fall, they're coming all the way to the coast of Maine, jump off, they'll fly 80 to 100 hours straight, nonstop over the ocean, kind of this direction, and the trade winds blow them back into northern Venezuela. Yeah, like 100 hours later. Okay, caribou can't do that. But so obviously there's real serious energetic demands. If you're going to do that sort of thing, you've got to shrink down your reproductive system to nothing, and then you got to find a way to reboot it the next spring. That's not easy. Here's the other thing. Let's say you're a Western tanager here, and you want to go to Panama, and let's say you're one of all these Western tanagers all over this enormous range of Western North America, and you all try to get down to the same spot. It's crowded. I don't know if you've been to the tropics, but there's already a lot of birds there. An incredible diversity and an incredible numeric abundance of many, many, many birds there. So that's something to consider too when you think about deforestation and habitat loss here and how that magnifies here. Big time. Okay, so there's competition. Let's go back to dangerous. Let's say you are a Western tanager and you like pine forests and you want to go to Panama. Well, there's no pine forest in Panama, so you're completely having to change your habitat, how you find food, the threats, the risks. You've probably never seen a windmill. You've probably never seen a house cat. You've never seen a window. You've never seen a car. You're traveling across a very hostile matrix of different environments that are not what you're necessarily comfortable with. So that's challenging. That's dangerous. Let's say you are this Western tanager again, and you're in Panama, and you're wanting to get back here. The reason they come back here is there's so much elbow room. There's so much resource. We got long days in the summer. There's tons of bugs, tons of primary productivity. You can make a lot of babies pretty easily if you get a good territory. Well, how do you time that? If you want to have the best odds of good success raising lots of young, then you want to get there early, but not too early. We have big, heavy spring storms sometimes, right? Those same winter conditions that drove you out of there, those can linger right through May and even into June. So you can't get there too early. You don't want to show up too late. You'll miss your opportunity. There'll be other competitors there. So that's the kind of thing that has to be worked out just over generations and generations of trial and error evolution. And that's tough. We get climate change happening, and then you have the spring storms are still here, but the breeding season is sort of shifted forward, and so it gets messy. Now, not all birds are going to go to Panama. Some of them try to stick around as long as they can, and then they're just going to bop down to Reno if it gets too hard. Or they head down to Auburn. So these are good examples. This is a song sparrow, Audubon's yellow-rumped warbler. Hopefully everybody knows what a robin looks like. Tough birds. Okay, and they've got to shift their diets. They're going to eat more berries. They're just hardy, yeah. So they'll try to hang out. And then a real advantage to this strategy is they can sort of keep an eye on the weather. He has no idea what kind of winter we're having, right? These guys, they know. So they can just pop back up the hill. And sometimes, like you'll see with bluebirds, they'll go down the hill after a couple stormy weeks, and then if we get a few weeks of clear weather, they'll pop back up. And then they can go back down, back up. You don't want to do that too much, but they are capable. Now, not all migrations involve flying. Some of the bigger migrations around here, mammal-wise, certainly would be the mule deer. Truckee and Tahoe is a really interesting confluence of 2 to 3 subspecies of deer, depending on your preferred taxonomy. But most of our deer are heading east. They just go downhill. But some of them do have to go up over the high passes, especially any of the deer like Blackwood Canyon or Desolation. They're going up and over Echo, up and over Luther Pass and South Lake, and all the way down to Carson Valley. And this is cultural knowledge that gets passed down from older deer to younger deer. They just sort of figure it out. Mule deer live maybe 11 to 13 years on average, depending on where you are in the part of the country. But we just had a 6-year drought pretty recently. So a big part of that cultural knowledge just sort of dies off at that point. And so I don't know where you guys were 2 winters ago when we had a big winter all of a sudden. After 6 years of barely winter, there were a lot of deer around. They were trying to make it. And so then they have to kind of refigure it out again. This is a mountain quail, and they also walk out of the Truckee and Tahoe Basin, Truckee region. And that's a lot more footsteps for this little guy, but they just, follow the same low passes and down river courses that the deer do. Interestingly, so we do have California quail as well, and they're not really adapted to migrate, and so they don't. So they just try to stick around, and then you'll have these populations that persist for a few years, and then they blank out after a couple big winters. Now, not everybody goes downhill to escape the winter. I study rabbits, and these guys are white-tailed jackrabbits. Have any of you heard of a white-tailed jackrabbit? A couple of you, okay, awesome. Most people don't realize that they've never heard of this. We have 2 rabbits here that turn white in winter, snowshoe hare, and then this thing is about 3 times the size of a snowshoe hare in terms of mass. They actually go up in the winter. It depends. If they're in the Carson Range, in the edge, they can go down to really nice, easy walk to get down to Carson Valley. They do that. This happens all along the eastern escarpment of the Sierra. They go down to Mono Lake. But if you're in Hope Valley, if you're in the Carson Pass area, they actually go up because the winds strip off the snow on those high ridges. And so they're able to go to the kind of the sunny windward side of these ridges and find enough vegetation to make it through the winter. Pretty tough. So you normally see these guys above 8,500 feet in the summer, and then in the winter they go up even higher, largely. Pretty tough. Now, not everything is leaving Tahoe when they migrate as well, so that's important to point out. Lake Tahoe itself doesn't freeze, and so we actually get a lot of ducks. This is a common goldeneye. We only have these in the wintertime. This is a rough-legged hawk. Large numbers of these come into Carson Valley and especially Sierra Valley area from the high Arctic. So these are GPS harnesses, basically, a little backpack that they wear. And look at where these things start, right? So some of these are going back and forth to Sierra Valley. Pretty impressive. Not all migrations are particularly predictable. So bald eagles are a good example of this. So here's, a pretty strong north-south thing happening with rough-legged hawks. Bald eagles, if you were to plot every bald eagle migration across the continent, it would just look like spaghetti. You've got bald eagles from the Yellowstone area that are going northwest to the British Columbia coast. You've got bald eagles from basically due north of us that kind of go straight through and all the way down to Fresno. And most of the bald eagles around the country, we don't know where they go. This has been an incredible success story of protection post-DDT. So bald eagles are on a huge rebound. We coordinate the midwinter bald eagle count every winter, and there's, this year I think we had 19 in the Tahoe Basin on one Friday in January. We had 110 volunteers out there just sitting on the beach. Thank you. Did you see any?
No.
Oh, yeah. Well, you don't always see some, but hopefully you do. And anyway, it's hopefully a pleasant way to spend 3 hours on a Friday morning. Okay. And yeah, so we get a snapshot of this. The numbers have been pretty steadily rising since we've been doing it. There were just a couple, back in the 70s. And what happens is these bald eagles, they come into the Tahoe region in September when the kokanee are running, and they're all over the place now. They stopped stocking Taylor Creek down in South Lake, and so now the kokanee are just kind of spreading out even more into just about every water body they can. So anyway, so the kokanee are running. These guys come in about September. That dries up after a few weeks, and then they hang out around Tahoe because it's an open body of water, and there's just ducks and coots and grebes. There's waterfowl that they can access and hunt all winter long. But then there's a big flush of calves and associated afterbirth and placenta and stuff. In the Carson Valley in particular, but also Sierra Valley. So earlier and earlier, it seems they're doing this. By about mid-January, right about, a month ago, most of our eagles head downhill, and then they'll hang out there for like 2 months, and then half of them seem to come back, and then they go to wherever they came from. We don't know. We have very few nesting eagles right around here, although they're increasing. Okay, hibernation. So this is a somewhat contentious topic for a lot of folks, and I will just say that there are scientists who study this, and they can argue among themselves about what constitutes hibernation. There have been different sort of traditional definitions that require a certain body temperature drop or a metabolic drop, but the bottom line is it's a seasonal dormancy where you're cranking your metabolism down as low as you can. You're probably dropping your temperature quite a bit, and you're shutting off for some period of time. Depending on what group of organisms you're talking about and what time of year you're talking about, there's a lot of names for this sort of stuff. So, yeah. So is it, torpor, dormancy, seasonal dormancy, estivation? That's kind of a summer thing. A lot of insects do that. They'll shut down in the middle of the summer for a break. Brumation is what the salamander people like to talk about. It's all just hibernation or seasonal dormancy, and it's kind of all on a continuum that we all go through on a daily basis too. Our temperatures go up and down and they drop, and we sort of get that late afternoon lull, and usually at night we sleep, hopefully. Everybody's different, I don't know. So anyway, do our bears hibernate? Well, it depends. Okay, so he's at a picnic table because what really drives hibernation in bears has a lot less to do with climate and weather and everything to do with food availability during the late fall and winter. And any wild, self-respecting bear around here is sleeping right now. Anyone that you see, maybe that's too judgy, but any bear that you see that's active right now is only active because it has access to garbage. And that's just an unfortunate fact of where we're living, and the fact that these things have been increasing at like 16% per year. So we're having more and more and more bears, and they got to find their food, so they're getting into trouble. But okay, so most bears are sleeping. Any pregnant female has to go down and den in order to give birth. So all females, and this is true for Mexico and Florida too, the females are going to den, if just for a little bit. So this is hard work, presumably. So I haven't done it. Yeah, So that's their solution, is they den, it's safe, they give birth while they're asleep. The young are nursing for quite a while, and then eventually they all pop out. Springtime. All right. Different ways of finding a den. We have a number of snakes around here. We basically have 3 garter snakes, rubber boa. We just started getting rattlesnakes in the Tahoe Basin in the last 3 years. Anyway, what snakes like to do, this is for all you, is they go in what's called a hibernaculum, and they huddle up and find these big, massive, very temperature-consistent holes in the ground and hang out. And then there's a real benefit of this is in the springtime, when it's time to reproduce, they don't have to go searching too far to find a mate. It all happens as soon as they emerge. They're right there. So, okay, so to me, this is the most amazing hibernation story around here. This is a Sierra chorus frog. They come in many colors. He's the little guy. He's the only one we get with the little mask. And they're all over the place. So you can hear these things sometimes singing in January, but you find these little things hopping around in all sorts of different habitats. They have a real knack for getting into like second-story bathrooms somehow. They're great climbers. They're all the way up Yosemite's El Cap. They like to hang out under flower pots, and they're little. So Sierra chorus frog. Now, okay, so I mentioned that ice is dangerous to water-filled cells, and this is about as water-filled and squishy as you could, look for an example with the frog. So they have a very, very clever strategy for dealing with that. And what they do is they direct the ice into certain parts of their body, and then they prevent ice from forming in other parts of their body. And the way they do that is they crank out blood sugars, like tons of blood sugars, into the parts that they don't want to freeze, and that's generally right around their vital organs. And then they steer ice to form by kicking out proteins as little nucleation agents in other parts where they want to encourage ice to form in the gaps between all that. And I do have a little video that I'm going to show that with a different species, but here's just the idea of the blood sugar levels. So this is sort of normal human blood glucose levels of around 100 micrograms per 100 milliliters of blood. There's diabetes in a human, generally speaking. This is what the frogs do. I don't know what they're eating to make so much sugar, but I'm not an organic chemist, but that would put any human into an instant coma that they would never come out of. Let's see if I can do this. Oh. I just tap it. Oh, okay.
Here's the thing about North American mountain frogs. They're small.
It might be very difficult to spot a frog.
Very small, but they're everywhere, just out of view, hiding on the forest floor.
Nothing.
He's camouflaged. His coloration is the same as the soil around him. You see him here? He's cold.
You can find them here in southern Ohio and all the way up to the Arctic Circle. But wherever they are, once it gets cold with the first sprinkle of ice, this frog does something I didn't know was possible. As soon as the frog just touches an ice crystal.
This animal is going to freeze.
Freeze?
Freeze. Solid freeze.
That touch of ice immediately sets off signals inside the frog, says Professor John Costanzo, that pulls water away from the center of its body, so the frog's internal organs are now wrapped in a puddle of water that then turns to solid ice.
I still can't get over it. It's really an amazing, amazing thing.
There is no breathing, no kidney function. The heart stops.
And there'll be no heartbeat for a long period of time.
You mean as in no heartbeat?
Right.
Nothing.
Flatline.
Flatline. For an hour or two?
It could be for days, perhaps even weeks.
Really? It sounds like it's virtually dead, no?
We know that the frog isn't dead, but he's probably about as close as you can get.
To being dead.
Yes.
So, from the outside, this little frog feels like a rock. Except that as it froze, the frog flooded itself with a kind of sugar.
The frog's blood sugar is distributed through the circulatory system. It works like an antifreeze.
It's harder for the water to freeze, so cells stay just damp enough for the animal to hold itself together. Until the springtime, when the days grow a little longer and the ground gets a little warmer. And then, well, a kind of miracle happens. After weeks or months of no heartbeat, none, suddenly there's a pulse. And that first heartbeat leads to another, and then another. And then within a day, and in the case of this little frog, it took about 10 hours, the animal literally comes back to life.
Spontaneous resumption of function.
Why?
We don't know. We don't know what triggers that event.
And think how elegant a business this is. Because although the sun is warming up the outside of this little guy, somehow his insides, his heart, his brain, they thaw first. His insides warm up before his outsides. But somehow it all happens in perfect synchrony every spring.
Yes, and it's going to undertake a very energetic activity. It's mating time.
You mean hours after it thaws, it's going to do it with a lady?
It's going to perform.
What an animal.
Can we say that on TV?
I don't know whether we can or not. Well, we just did.
That's the North American wood frog. We don't have those here, but we do have the chorus frogs, and the wood frog is like the king of that. So he mentioned that they might not have a heartbeat for months. So the ones that are like way in northern Quebec or something, they just shut down for months. Flatline, no brain activity, no heart activity. Somehow they're able to resurrect themselves. Our frogs, I think, are a little tougher to become active and then inactive, as we might get a little warm spell or something, you know, in January, February, something like that. We do get those sort of warmer periods. But yeah, I actually found one of these trying to cross the road over at Glenshire right after those big snows we had right after Thanksgiving. And I was pretty surprised. So I don't know what, you know, triggers ours to go through that. I think they probably find a better place to pull off that feat. But they do the same thing, and that has been studied here in California. Pretty amazing. So anyway, I'll touch on bugs here for a minute. There's just an incredible diversity of insects. So as you can imagine, there's the whole suite of adaptations and strategies that would cover everything you can imagine. Another thing that insects have going for them is that they crank out a lot of new insects, right? So that's always one good strategy for getting through the winter is just make a ton of babies, and then you're playing pretty good odds that way. Most insects aren't going to try to be active or awake during the winter, but there are a few that actively hibernate, and a lot of them are going to pass through the winter in maybe a larval form or as an egg. If you got a nice, tough, hard egg casing, you're good, you know, depending especially where you put it. Some insects are going to be active through the winter, like wood-boring beetles, and so that provides a real steady supply of food for woodpeckers straight through the winter. It's pretty handy for the woodpeckers, not so great for the tree, but, you know. So different strategies that some insects use is so trying to just avoid freezing in the first place. If you're tiny, you're likely going to cool off really fast, right? And insects are ectothermic. The surrounding temperature cools them down very quickly. So just trying to find shelter, especially if you're going to hibernate, that's a great strategy. You find a lot of nymphalid butterflies, things like mourning cloak, if you know any butterflies, mourning cloak, zephyr anglewing, things like that. They'll just slip behind a little piece of bark, or they'll get in your wood pile, and they'll just spend the winter like that. And then if we get a couple really warm days, like by February, you can sometimes see them flitting around, and they don't necessarily need a flower to find nectar. They'll feed off like gross things like manure or dead animal or tree sap, stuff like that. So this is actually a painted a West Coast lady. They just migrate down to the deserts. So that's not a good example. But this is a good example of a hibernator. So this is not a brown marmorated stink bug, which is invasive, that looks a lot like that. This is a rough stink bug. Anyway, this is a critter that you can definitely see trying to get into your house in October and November, real common. But if you just put them outside, hopefully you'll find a wood pile or something. They're not bad. So some insects are able to just basically get all the water out of their system, and so that prevents the ice formation. Supercooling, so trying to remove any proteins that are going to allow for ice formation, and then freezing point depression versus via glucose. Basically, that's what the frog's doing. And then he's also the frog is controlling what and where the ice forms by putting out proteins as a nucleation agent to encourage ice formation in certain spots, right? So sugar where you don't want ice, proteins where you do. So, and then anyway, that's kind of just most bugs. Squirrels are really interesting. So it's a really diverse group here. We've got flying squirrels, tree squirrels. 3 different kinds of tree squirrels. We got a whole pile of ground squirrels and chipmunks. So the real limiting factor on what kind of activity you can have during the winter is ability to find food. So if you're a flying squirrel and you like fungus and stuff, and you can hide out in a hole in a tree in the stormy weather, you can stay active through the winter. All of our tree squirrels are active through the winter, right? Chipmunks, they all hibernate. They put up good stores of seeds, and they actually will take a nap for like a week and a half or something like that, and then they pop up, go to the bathroom, have a little bite to eat, maybe even pop up for some fresh air, and then they go back to bed for another 2 weeks. And they just sort of do that all winter. So that's one strategy. Is that hibernation? Yeah, maybe. These are Belding's ground squirrels. They actually tie the record with Arctic ground squirrels for kind of the longest dormancy of any road in North America. And you can find these all around here, particularly in high alpine meadows, like up on Mount Rose, or if you take the tram up to High Camp or something in the summertime, there's loads of them. So they're like kind of lawn-type alpine ridges and meadows. The males, I believe it's the males, will actually go down in mid to late August, and they'll stay dormant like right through April and into May. The Arctic ground squirrel, these are Beldings, but the Arctic ground squirrel has been studied very, very closely. Some research group out of Fairbanks, and they've determined that these guys actually hibernate so hard that they go through sleep debt. And hibernation and sleep are different, and you need sleep to keep your brain working. And so they actually warm their body up, and then they go through some REM cycles, and then they get cold again, and they drop back down to nothing, and hibernate for another couple weeks. It's kind of crazy. They warm up just enough to dream, and they go back down. So this is our biggest, fattest squirrels. We just had Groundhog Day, so this is our marmot. And the chipmunks don't put on any fat except one species out of the 5 we have. These guys put on a lot of fat, but it is a dangerous thing to put on too much fat too early. This is tasty golden eagle food. So they kind of hold off as long as they can, and then right towards the end of the season, they go into like a hyperphagy where they just cannot eat enough like the bears do. And it's a tough thing because the food's green and nutrition earlier in the summer, and they have to like somehow hold off. I don't know how they do that. But notice how round he is, right? So fat is great if that works for you. It makes you nice and round, which means you have the maximum volume to surface area ratio, so that's good. It provides energy stores that you already have on board. You don't have to eat anything extra, and but you are slow. Yeah, but there's more than one way to go round, right? So feathers, right? Took that in my backyard. That's a pygmy owl, northern pygmy owl. Took that in my backyard. This is a cottontail, fur, and notice what he's doing there. He's trying to just be a sphere, right? He is enacting a principal tenet of what's called Allen's rule, which one of the old biogeographical rules you learn in high school. And this one states that within a genus, as you go north in latitude and colder temps, your limbs get shorter, your ears get shorter, and so this is just a good example from the hares and jackrabbits. Be round. Sometimes it's hard to be round by yourself. Recruit. So these are eastern bluebirds. I think there's 17 in this photo. I have a bird box in my backyard. I live in Glenshire. I've seen 11 western bluebirds pile in at the end of the day into my box. And so they absolutely do that here. This is a illustration from a photo of golden crowned kinglets. Golden crowned kinglets weigh about the same as a nickel. This is a bird that lives here through the winter, and they are all puffed up and stuffing their faces into one another's feathers to spend the night. Pretty amazing. There's a lot of other benefits to teamwork, and so if you're not trying to reproduce, you don't have to worry about necessarily holding out a territory against other birds. So a lot of birds will join mixed species flocks to get through the winter. And if you put a bird feeder out, you'll see this sort of thing where you can have maybe a half a dozen different species there. And so that's good. They can go out in larger groups, and maybe there's a bit of a group effort in terms of foraging, and also there's more eyes and ears against potential threats and predators. So there's a lot of benefits to teamwork in the winter. Okay. I mentioned earlier that snow was good shelter and actually great insulator for a lot of critters. Maybe the best example, if any of you have a lawn, is the voles. They are able to stay active and protected from owls and coyotes under the snow, and they are reproducing. They are making new babies straight through the winter. So populations can actually go up of voles through the winter, and then you see all the eskers and their little nests and everything come springtime. It's not just the rodents, though. We have insectivores like shrews, tiny, tiny little insect-eating, they look like rodents, but they're just tiny mammals. They don't eat vegetation at all. They're eating insects and worms and things like that, and they are staying active under the snow where it's 33, 34, maybe 36 degrees Fahrenheit through the winter. When we don't have a good snowpack, and even on this cold summer night, those things really suffer because their metabolism is so high they need to eat a lot of bugs. So snow is really important to a lot of our small mammal populations to help them rebound. And then another frozen water insulator that you may not think about much is just ice. There's a whole lot going on under ice. Water is crazy. It's the only thing I can think of. I'm not a chemist, but it expands as both a gas, like most elements, and as a solid, right? And so it floats. It's less dense as a solid. It floats. Have you ever thought about what would happen to to our planet if ice sank. I mean, it would never thaw, completely melt. Some people think it actually warm up because you wouldn't have all the reflection from the ice caps, but regardless, there's a lot going on under the water, which I don't have time to talk about. Okay, so regardless of whatever your strategy is, you're going to need to prepare, right? Sometimes that means, like this pica here, putting up hay piles. Does everybody know what a pica is? It's like a little chinchilla kind of thing. It's related to our rabbits, and they live in talus slopes in the colder ridges around here. This is blocky rocks, this is talus. And they put up hay piles at the end of the summer to kind of concentrate the nutrients and dry and preserve their food. And then all winter long, they're staying active down in these icy, pitch black, subterranean, horrible, I can't even imagine what that winter's like, places. It just sounds horribly boring, but that's what they do. And so cold, yes. Putting on fat is a big one. This is a ton of fat getting ready for migration from a Swainson's thrush. We talked about the marmot. Another thing is get your timing right. This is sadly a young bear, a tiny bear that I saw up at Tahoe Meadows on Thanksgiving one year. Way too late. You're not going to make it. So you need to make sure that you can grow big enough that you're going to get through the winter with what you need. Now, I mentioned that most birds don't bother with territoriality. How are we doing? I'm at 47, 40, okay? Okay. All right. Don't bother with territoriality because it's just too harsh and cold to be thinking about reproduction. There's 2 exceptions around here of birds that will actually sing straight through the winter. And it's pretty cool when you're out there in a storm backcountry skiing up at Castle Peak and you hear this guy going. You know what? Well, I don't have time. I should play his song. He's kind of plain looking, but this bird is quite the songster. So they love juniper berries, and a lot of junipers grow up really high, harsh, windy places. And so the males will actually stake out a territory that have lots of juniper berries, and they will sing straight through the winter, drive off any robins, any bluebirds, and other thrushes, and certainly any other Townsend solitaires. So that's really nice that they'll sing. But they're not reproducing, they're just protecting their winter food supply. This is a red crossbill. These guys can actually have babies just about any time of the year. They're highly nomadic. They've got a very specialized bill here. You can see it, this was crossing like this. And it crosses so that they can get into a conifer cone and pry it open before it's really ripe. And then they fish it out with their tongue like a parrot, and they eat the seed. That's their primary food source year-round. So they fly around in these enormous flocks all over the continent. They go all the way down to Nicaragua, and there's different types that will soon probably be split into many different species, possibly as many as 11. With different shaped bills that correspond to different types of conifer cones, okay? They wander around, and then when they find a big old cone crop, they just settle, and then they get to the business of reproduction. Now, they can do that at almost any time of year because they can actually feed their young ground-up pine seeds that they regurgitate. Most birds can't just subsist on vegetation like that, especially pine seeds. It's like, I don't know. Like, pine nuts are good, but Jeffrey pine seeds is probably closer to turpentine, I imagine. But anyway, there's one brief period in the year where they can't, and it's because feathers are so important and they're so hard to take care of that they need to go through a molt at least once a year. So as the photo period, as the day length kind of shrinks down right around mid-October or so, any thoughts of reproduction stop. They'll go through a molt. Maybe it takes a couple of weeks for the whole population to crank out a new set of feathers, and then by New Year, Christmas, they can start having babies again. And so you can hear this bird singing any time of year, though. That's pretty great. Another way to prepare yourself for the winter, if you're going to stay active in particular, is camouflage. We do have, we've got 5 species, 4 mammals and 1 bird in the greater Tahoe area that turn white for the winter. And so this is a snowshoe hare, great example. I showed you the white-tailed jackrabbit earlier. We've got two weasels, long-tailed weasel and short-tailed weasel. They basically look the same, just little subtle differences in the summertime, whether they're yellow or white underneath, and then the length of the tail, but that's hard to tell sometimes. And then ptarmigan. So the white-tailed ptarmigan, these are introduced from the Rockies, but they were thrown out of planes in the Bridgeport area many, many times, and eventually they took hold as a game species, and they get just up to Carson Pass. There's no records for the Tahoe Basin itself, but anyway, look at these little snowshoes. Yeah, I took this with a point and shoot. I mean, you can just walk right up to them. They're so confident with their camouflage. Yeah, you can't see me. Which is great when it works. Now, things are kind of getting out of phase a little bit with our changing climate, and so that really affects these. Now, luckily for the rabbits, they reproduce, as rabbits do, a lot and quickly, and so evolution happens at a little bit faster time frame. They've been studying this out of phase problem in Montana, and they've found that in the springtime they can sort of delay how quickly they turn brown, but they really don't have any control over when that starts. And in the fall, going into white, they can't really control it at all. So it's an issue. You're kind of vulnerable out there. Now, the weasels, they're predators, but to a hawk, that's just like a white sausage or something. So anyway, yeah. So it's an issue. Okay, I've actually gone a little bit long, but that's good because I wanted to open up for questions if I have time, and I also wanted to leave that up there for anybody that's interested. Anybody that has any questions about our organization, that's our website. I hope to talk to you. I'll stick around for a while. Martin's back there. He's happy to talk to you as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Where do the birds hang out in the winter?
Where do the birds hang out in the winter? So which birds?
Any of them, the bluebirds, the chickadees, where do they sleep at night?
Oh, right. Okay. So that illustration of the kinglets, they're just on a branch. A big one at night, especially in this arid climate, is to have a roof because you lose a lot of heat to the night sky. And so it's good to try to get under a branch, and just kind of stuff yourself in. Now, chickadees are pretty funny. They will cram themselves into really tight spaces. I have a little opening right above my front door, and sometimes I come home and there's a chickadee just with his face shoved into the corner and he's all puffed out. Even in the summertime, I've seen chickadees with their tails bent because they went into some crack into a stump and just kind of shove themselves in there. And they're trying to prevent conductive and convective heat loss. Most birds are pretty good at figuring that out. Calliope hummingbirds in the summer, they build their nests in a fork with a little roof over it because they want to keep that heat in overnight just in the summertime. Birds that are cavity nesters, they'll roost in a hole. So the chickadee is a good example of that. They nest in a hole, so they'll roost in a hole overnight. But the rest of them, they just got to find a good spot to huddle together or independently puff out their feathers, go for that Allen's rule insulation, and tough it out.
So are they mostly up high?
Are they mostly up high so they're not available to predators, so they find things in trees, holes in trees?
Yeah, right. So are they mostly up high and away from predators? So yeah, and also it's not a bad idea to get up off the ground because cooling air is going to sink. I mentioned the Calliope hummingbird, broadtail hummingbird males in the Rocky Mountains, they fly way up high every evening to higher elevations to get away from that sinking cold air. Every night, they got to go up 1,000 feet, Yeah, there's some interesting examples. We do have poor whales. They don't winter here at this elevation, but they actually will go into a period of torpor for a while. The Navajo name for that bird was the sleeping one, and they kind of hibernate. And ruffed grouse, where they occur, which is more like New England, but as close as Oregon, will occasionally, like if it's cold, dry, puffy snow, they'll get up on a limb and just dive into the snow, get down in it, and just kind of crash out for a couple days. All the different birds have different, strategies.
It's such a delicate ecosystem, and these animals are just all out there trying to survive. And but my question is, so here we had these big storms a few days ago. Then today it's beautiful blue sky, clear, and we know, well, little boys that lie grow up to be weathermen, but they are predicting that there's going to be big storms coming the next couple days. So can animals predict the weather? Do they know that there's a storm coming tomorrow?
Can animals predict the weather? So certainly in the short term, it seems to be the case, and they can certainly react to the weather. If they don't, you see this in the spring a lot, where we get storms and then huge amounts of birds will go downhill for a couple days and then they go back up. So there's the issue of like, can they keep a step ahead? You definitely see in the fall, especially with waterfowl, big numbers that are like just trying to get ahead of some weather system. So they certainly seem to be able to feel like plummeting barometric pressure and what that means. I think for birds like the chickadees that are trying to just hang in there, I think they just take advantage of the good weather. And, on a day like today, you can see flying insects. There are stoneflies that are hatching out of creeks right now. They're winter stoneflies. There are a lot of insects that do remain active, but it's only when the weather's good, so they just get it while they can, and then they sort of suffer through the rest, Or they go to Chickadee Ridge, about Mount Rose, and get handouts. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Will. That was really interesting. We're going to be sticking around for a few more minutes, so if anyone has more questions, Will said he could stay for a little bit and answer them. But we really appreciate you coming, and thank you, everyone, for coming. You all are the reason that we do this every month, so thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.